All right. So we are talking here about the kingdom Animalia. We're thinking about Latin. We've discussed that already. So give me the 3 words that we use to describe animals. So we've been talking about, for all these various kingdoms, number of cells. What word do I use to describe animals? Abby? They're multicellular. How about their means of getting energy? Ellen? Heterotroph. And how about their cell nucleus? What's the word I use for that? Maya? Eukaryote. The multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotrophs. And there are many, many different types of animals. There's a wide variety of different body plans and complexity and so forth. And so one convenient way to sort of talk about animals is to split them into 2 groups, vertebrates and invertebrates. Okay. Animals with a backbone are called vertebrates, and animals without a backbone are called invertebrates. Now, I do want to tell you, though, this isn't really a taxonomic group, vertebrates versus invertebrates. Okay. It's just sort of a convenient way to think about those. Most of the animals that are on the earth fall into which category?
Multicellular?
Well, out of these 2, what do you think, Blake?
I'm guessing vertebrates.
Do you say in or vertebrate? Vertebrates? No, actually, they're actually the smaller percentage. 97% of all animals are actually invertebrates. Now, we often will think that vertebrates are more common, because that's sort of, if I ask you to think of an animal, probably you're thinking about a vertebrate. Okay? You're probably thinking about, I don't know, a polar bear, or a dog, or a bear. Or something. But really, 97% of all animals are this group, these invertebrates. All right, so if we look at some animals, is that a vertebrate or an invertebrate? Daniel? It's actually a vertebrate. It has a backbone. That little tiny poison dart fly. How about the worm, James? Invertebrate, correct. How about that lobster? Connell? Invertebrate. How about Mr. Arcuri's pet polar bear?
Lucky.
Yeah. See that? Doesn't that brick look familiar? Abby.
Vertebrate?
That is a vertebrate, yes.
It's so cute.
Yeah, it is.
I want it.
All right. When we talk about the invertebrate groups, we talk about their symmetry as one of the defining characteristics of each group. And I think you probably have studied symmetry before, correct? Maybe in math class? Like if certain shapes have various types of symmetry. Symmetry is a word about the arrangement of parts in an organism. And we have 3 words that we use when we're talking about symmetry in organisms. They may have asymmetry, they may have bilateral symmetry, or they may have radial symmetry. Okay, we'll talk about what these mean and look at some examples. So the first one, asymmetry, that means they don't have any sort of pattern to their body plan, no sort of organization. Like a just random shape would be asymmetry. Bilateral symmetry. What does the prefix bi mean? Talked about this before. The prefix bi. Eddie, how many wheels on a unicycle?
1.
Right? How many wheels on a bicycle?
2.
How many on a tricycle?
3.
Yes. What does bi mean?
2.
Means 2. Lateral means side. Bilateral means there's two equal sides to the organism. For example, you look at this gentleman. It's bilateral symmetry. You could draw a line down the middle and have basically the same thing on each side. Humans and other mammals have bilateral symmetry. Two equal sides.
What do you mean by two equal sides?
Sort of if you draw a line down the middle, that what you have on one side is about the same as what you have on the other side. So Homer here has an eye on each side, an ear on each side.
What do you mean, like the same organisms?
Yeah, basically the same setup. You know, there may be some variation. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the overall layout of the body is two sides that are about equal. And then we have radial symmetry. Can you guess what radial symmetry means? It comes from the same word as radius. What kind of shape would you find the radius of? What?
Circle?
A circle. This is a circular pattern. Like a flower. A flower has a circular pattern. It has radial symmetry. Sort of like spokes on a wheel. All right, so if we look here at these three pictures, you don't have the slides, okay. This insect has what type of symmetry is this? Alan?
Bilateral?
Bilateral, two sides. Okay, it's got a leg on each side, an antenna. Now how about this sea anemone? What kind of symmetry does that have, Maggie?
Asymmetry?
Not quite. Abby?
Radial symmetry?
Yeah, that has radial symmetry. If you think about the tentacles of this sea anemone are sort of arranged in the circular pattern like spokes on a wheel. So that would be radial symmetry. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's got to be the overall pattern. How about this sponge here? Type of symmetry, Ken? Yeah, that's asymmetry. There's really no pattern. It's just sort of random. Okay, let's look at some other things. These are all different types of living things. How about the cat? What type of symmetry, Hannah? Bilateral. You could draw a line right down the middle. And we have equal sides. How about this spider? Daniel?
Bilateral?
Also bilateral. Again, draw a line down the middle. We have four legs on each side. Okay, one mouthpiece on each side, and so forth. We all know what this is, right?
Yeah.
What is it?
Amoeba.
An amoeba. What kind of symmetry does an amoeba have? Connell?
Asymmetry.
Asymmetry. There's no pattern at all. This is a sea urchin. Eddie?
Radio.
It has radial symmetry. Yes. These spikes here are arranged in a circular pattern. You sometimes might find them in the ocean. You can see that they're in this very distinct pattern. We are going to look at these next week. These are a type of flatworm called a planaria. What type of symmetry does a planaria have? James?
Bilateral?
Bilateral. I should draw a line right down the middle there and the two equal sides. You know what this is? You may have seen these on the shore in the ocean. Maya?
A horse crab?
Horseshoe crab. Yep. What type of symmetry does this horseshoe crab have? Eddie?
Bilateral.
Bilateral.
Lateral.
You know what this is? You may find it on the beach. You may see it at a store that sells shells if you go somewhere. Abby?
Sand dollar?
It's a sand dollar. It's actually an animal. And what type of symmetry does it have? James?
A radial.
Radial symmetry, correct. And finally, the starfish. What type of symmetry does the starfish have? Guy? Yeah, radial symmetry. Okay, we have sort of like spokes in a wheel. Okay? Something with radial symmetry also has bilateral, by definition. With radial symmetry, you have like several ways you can sort of slice it and end up with equal halves, but we say it's radial. Good point. All right, so let's talk about invertebrates. So first off, these are animals without a backbone or a spinal column. They have no internal skeleton of bone. And they make up the vast majority of all animals are invertebrates. 95 or 96 or 97%. You'll see different figures, but by far they're the most abundant of animals. And they go from things that are very, very simple, like this. What is that? It's a sponge. It is an animal. It's an invertebrate. To much more complex, like a crab or a lobster or an octopus. Those are also invertebrates. Okay? Obviously, there's quite a bit of difference there. Eddie?
Do sponges, like, if you were, like, sea sponges, how do they, like, live and breathe? Do they have, like,
They don't breathe.
tiny hearts or something?
Nope. They're very simple. In fact, we're going to talk about them right now. So, sponges is one of the phyla of invertebrates. Okay, and so like, yeah, this is an example of a sponge. You've probably seen these sort of things before. I'll pass it around. You can touch it, squeeze it a little bit. Sponges are the simplest of invertebrates. They have asymmetry. So again, if I look at this thing, there's no real way I can split it in equal parts. It's just got all these little pieces. And what happens, these sponges, they attach themselves to the ocean floor usually. And they just sort of stay there. And what they do is all of these, like the Latin name for the sponge phylum is called porifera. What is a pore? We talked about it in diffusion. What's a pore? Okay? A hole. And that sponge is made of, has all these holes that go through it. What happens is those sponges suck in ocean water, and as it goes through those pores, they filter out tiny little bits of bacteria or plants or tiny little protists, and that's what they digest for their nutrients. They're called filter feeders. They suck in water, filter out little bits of stuff, and then squeeze the rest of the water out. Okay. Yeah, sort of. They're filter feeders because they filter krill and stuff out of the water. And they come in all sorts of colors. When they're alive, there are a variety of colors and shapes and sizes. So on these sponges, it will suck in water in the sides to the pores and then squeeze it out through the main opening. They are very simple, though. They have cells, but they don't have tissues. They have no organs, no organ systems. They're basically a small collection of cells that filters out a little piece of stuff from the water. So what you're holding, what you're passing around, is basically the leftover skeleton of a sponge that was once actually alive. Those natural sponges that you see, they came from the ocean floor somewhere. All right. Another group of invertebrates are the Cnidarians. And the Cnidarians are a group that includes jellyfish, coral, hydra, sea anemones. Okay? And one of their characteristics, they have on their tentacles these special cells called nematocysts. And these are stinging cells. Okay? For example, this is a hydra. We're going to be looking at hydra next week as well under the microscope. And these are tiny little invertebrate animals. They have these tentacles on the top that they, what they do is they stung their prey. These nematocysts sting their prey to immobilize it. Then they use the tentacles. They put it inside of their body, which is in the stalk here. They have one body opening, and then they digest the food. Okay, they have radial symmetry. Again, these tentacles are organized in a circular pattern. Here's a jellyfish. Again, another type of cnidarian. Anyone ever been stung by a jellyfish if you've been in the ocean? No? That's good. But they can sting you. Sometimes if you're like swimming in the ocean and there's a jellyfish nearby, the long tentacles may be near you, and if it gets wrapped around your arm or something, those nematocysts can sting you, and they hurt. They basically are like these little torpedoes, tiny little microscopic torpedoes that go into your skin and inject a toxin that burns and hurts. So some places where there's a lot of jellyfish, at the lifeguard stations, they may have a special solution that you spray on it if you do get stung by a jellyfish. If there's a lot, they'll sometimes close beaches. There's too many jellyfish. We go to South Carolina lots of times in the spring break, and a lot of times we'll find them washed up on the beach in the morning. You know, little bullseye jellyfish about this big. Go down in Florida sometimes, and you see these Portuguese manivores. It's like little blue bubbles. Have you ever seen those? Again, that's a type of jellyfish as well. That bubble part floats on the surface, and the tentacles trail along. Here's another example. Not this, but this. What is this animal?
It's a sea anemone.
That's an anemone. This is a clownfish. Yeah, and the sea anemone has stinging cells. Why can the clownfish... So does anyone know the story of the clownfish?
No.
Huh?
Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo. So what can the clownfish do that other fish cannot? Hide inside of the tentacles of the anemone. It is resistant to those stinging cells, so the clownfish is not stung by them. So it can go in there and hide, but if another fish comes and tries to get at it, it would get stung. So this is another anemone. They have a stalk. They sort of attach to something, and then the tentacles are on top. Some more jellyfish. Okay, so these are all cnidarians. Another group are the echinoderms. The name echino means spine, echino. Derm. Does anyone know what derm means? Like dermis or dermatologist? It is a doctor who studies what? Skin. Derm means skin. So the name means spiny skin. And these are animals, usually they have spines, the sand dollar is included. Other things like a sea urchin. It's okay, James, she's just saying hi. Starfish. Those are all echinoderms. Oh, let me go back. And basically they have one body opening. They are also usually filter feeders, where they take in some water, filter out little bits, little pieces of stuff to eat, and then send the rest of the water out. They do, the sand dollar, for example, can move. I'll have a video I'll show you where you can see the sand dollar actually moving. They move through the soil. The starfish, they are interesting. What used to happen, sometimes when fishermen would be fishing for whatever fish they want to catch, they would catch starfish and they'd be annoyed because they didn't want the starfish. So they would sometimes chop them up and throw them back in the ocean because they would think they would get rid of them. But does anybody know anything about starfish? Eddie?
Their legs grow back.
Yeah, that they can reproduce asexually. You see this central circle here? As long as any part of the starfish has a piece of that, it'll grow back into a whole new starfish. So actually by chopping off into pieces, they're actually creating more starfish because each of those little pieces is going to grow into a whole new starfish. These sea urchins, You know, they can hurt your feet if you step on them sometimes near the ocean. Sometimes you find them washed up on the shore. They have these very sharp spines on them. Some of them can be poisonous. But these are echinoderms. Any questions about echinoderms? Okay, worms. Worms are invertebrates. There's actually several types of worms. We're just going to call them worms. But there's a few different groups. Some are parasites. Some are free-living. This is an earthworm, one we've all seen before, right? And this earthworm is one of the worms called the segmented worm. Body's broken up into segments. They live in soil. They're very, very important for the soil. You could actually you could order in the mail a whole bunch of earthworms that you could then add to your garden. You know how they're helpful for the soil? What do you think earthworms do that you would want to pour a bag of them in your garden soil? Abby?
They make holes in the soil so things
Yeah.
water.
One important thing that they do is they burrow through the soil, helping to get oxygen into the soil. They also, what do earthworms eat? You know what they live off of? Eddie?
I think it's kind of like little parasites in the soil.
I don't know. Some might eat some parasites, but lots of times it's sort of dead organic matter, little bits of leaves and plants and things, and they take them in, digest it, and then their waste comes out, and that helps to fertilize the soil. You see earthworm, they're called castings. They're little piles of, looks like soil, and when you're a kid, you probably picked them up and squeezed them. They're next to like an earthworm burrow, but it really is earthworm waste that you wear. Earthworm poo, that's what you're playing with. Another example of another segmented worm. Does anyone know what this is? That is a leech. Leeches, they feed off of the blood of other animals, and they basically attach to the surface, and then they make a little wound in the animal. They have special chemicals in their saliva that stop the person's blood from clotting or the animal's blood from clotting, and they sort of fill up. They ingest blood from that animal. They get really swollen, and then they fall off, and then they digest that blood. That's what they use as their source of energy. I have a video I'll show you next. This is a flatworm. This is a planaria, the one that we'll see next week. This stuff that looks like spaghetti or thread, it's actually a worm. This is a worm that can infect animals, especially dogs. So everyone give their dog once every 3 months a little tablet of brown medicine. What is it?
It's like so you don't get heartworms.
Yeah, this is heartworm. Heartworm is a type of parasitic worm that if it gets into an animal, it makes its way to the heart, it lives off of the blood, and as it grows and reproduces, it gets so big that it clogs up. This is the heart of a dog that died from this heartworm. You can see its entire heart was filled up with these worms that block the flow of blood and can eventually be fatal for the dog. That's why you give them. This is another parasitic worm. This is a person's leg. This is a person with elephantiasis. Elephantiasis is a parasitic worm that gets into a person's body and clogs their lymphatic system, which circulates fluid around their body, and that fluid swells the lower extremities of that person. And so their calf and foot is swollen up with body fluid because this worm is blocking it from getting back into circulation. It's another flatworm. This is a fluke. Kind of live in the ocean, very colorful. They swim with these neat patterns. All right, let me show you. All right, we got a few minutes. I think we can probably fit it in. I'll show you the video about leeches. You can put your notepad away.